This is the file marked, presumed dead, that nobody's actually allowed to close. So here's a fun fact for you before we even get into this. The man who murdered his entire family and then vanished for 15 years straight. He's descended from actual French nobility, church founders, a coat of arms. And somehow, that respectable, aristocratic background is exactly what let him disappear this cleanly. And right now, in 2026, not 10 years ago, not 5 years ago, right now, 2 different continents just picked up his trail at the same time. So stick around, because this isn't a cold case anymore. Okay, let's start at the beginning, because the beginning of this story is honestly kind of boring. Which is exactly the point. Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès looked like nothing was ever wrong with him. 50 years old. Silver hair, always combed back. Always in a blazer, even on weekends. He introduced himself as a business consultant, sometimes a marketing expert, sometimes a former military reservist with vague connections he could never really explain. He spoke fluent English. He carried himself like old money, because in a way, he was old money, his family name traced back generations, tied to French clergy and minor nobility, the kind of lineage with an actual family crest sitting in some regional archive somewhere. People who met him described the same thing over and over. Calm. Composed. The kind of man who remembered your name after meeting you once, who always seemed to know exactly the right thing to say at a funeral or a wedding or a dinner party. His wife, Agnes, was 48. Quiet. Devout. The emotional center of the household, the one who actually held the family together while Xavier played the role of provider. She'd grown up in a religious family herself and passed that same devotion down to her kids. Sunday Mass wasn't optional in that house, it was just what you did. They'd been married over 20 years. Together they had 4 kids. Arthur was the oldest, 21, off studying but still close enough to be home most weekends. Thomas was 18, finishing up his final year of school, already talking about what came next. And was 16, right in the middle of that awkward, wonderful stretch of being a teenager, figuring out who she wanted to be. And Benoit was the baby of the family, just 13, still young enough that everyone in the house looked out for him a little extra. From the outside, looking at the Dupont de Ligonnès family, you'd have seen something almost aggressively normal. Mass every Sunday. Big family dinners around a long wooden table. 2 dogs running around the yard. A nice, quiet house in a nice, quiet Nantes suburb, the kind of street where everybody knows everybody, and nobody locks their doors, and kids ride bikes until the streetlights come on. Here's the thing though. Underneath that picture-perfect surface, Xavier was falling apart. Financially. Completely. And he was the only one in that house who actually knew it. For years, Xavier had been running something he called a business training institute, basically a consulting operation that promised big returns to investors and quietly delivered almost nothing. It had all the trappings of legitimacy. Official-sounding paperwork. Confident presentations. A polished website. But when investigators went back through the finances later, it looked less like a real company and more like a house of cards that had been wobbling for a long, long time. Debts were piling up behind the scenes. Investors were starting to ask uncomfortable questions he couldn't answer. Money that should have existed simply didn't. And Xavier had built his entire sense of self around being the successful patriarch. The provider. The respected name at church. The man other parents trusted with their own kids, the guy people asked for advice. If that image collapsed, so did everything he thought he was. Not just his bank account, his entire identity. And somewhere in early 2011, investigators believe Xavier made a decision. Not a spur-of-the-moment decision, either, something he'd clearly been sitting with for weeks, maybe longer. He decided his family was never walking out of that house alive. And that he was. Between April 3rd and April 5th, 2011, over the course of just a couple of days, all 5 members of the Dupont de Ligonnès family were shot to death inside their own home. Investigators' reconstruction suggests Agnes was killed first. Then, one at a time, each of the kids. Xavier reportedly used a silenced pistol, a weapon connected to his old military background, one he apparently knew exactly how to use without waking up the entire neighborhood. Think about the planning that requires. Not just owning a weapon like that, but knowing how to use it quietly, in a house full of people who trusted him completely, without a single neighbor noticing anything out of the ordinary. Then he did something that's almost more disturbing than the murders themselves, if that's even possible. He stayed calm. He buried them. Under the concrete patio slab in the backyard. The exact same patio where the family used to eat dinner together on warm evenings, where the kids used to sit and do homework in the sun. He buried the family dogs there too, right alongside them, like he was tidying up loose ends rather than hiding the worst thing a human being can do. And then he waited. For the next several days, Xavier walked around acting completely, unbelievably normal. Security footage and receipts pieced together afterward show him going to the bank to pull out cash. A lot of it. Going to a hardware store for rope and supplies. Filling up his car at a local gas station like a man just running weekend errands, not a man who had just buried his entire family in his own yard. He was polite to cashiers. He made small talk. Nobody who interacted with him during those days remembers anything strange about him at all. And he started writing letters. He wrote to the kids' schools, explaining they'd all be homeschooled abroad for a while. He wrote to relatives, saying the family had a sudden opportunity, a relocation to the United States, something about a new job, sometimes a vague story about a religious mission. The details shifted slightly depending on who he was writing to, tailored to what each person would find believable. And here's the part that still gets me, he forged Agnes's signature on some of these letters. Practiced enough, careful enough, that nobody who received one thought twice about it. Some of the letters even included small, personal details only a close family member would know, which meant he wasn't just forging a signature, he was performing his wife's voice. 9 days. That's how long it took before a single person on Earth suspected something was actually wrong. 9 days of everyone believing this completely normal family was simply on their way to America, while all 5 of them were already in the ground, underneath their own patio, in the yard where neighbors would walk their dogs past every single day without knowing. It was a worried relative who couldn't get anyone on the phone, who finally pushed hard enough to bring police to the house. And when police finally pulled back that patio slab on April 21st, 2011, they found all 5 of them. Agnes, Arthur, Thomas, Anne, Benoit. Together, in a hole dug into their own backyard. A discovery that would define the words on every headline in France the next morning, and one that would haunt investigators for the next decade and a half. And by that point, Xavier already had a 9-day head start on the entire French police force. Here's where this story genuinely turns into something out of a thriller movie, except every part of it actually happened. Investigators traced Xavier's movements after the murders, and it reads like a man executing a plan he'd rehearsed in his head 100 times before actually doing it. He drove south, all the way down to the French Riviera, to a small town called Roquebrune-sur-Argens, hundreds of miles away from Nantes. He checked into a hotel under his own real name, no disguise, no fake ID, nothing. That detail alone tells you something. This wasn't a man frantically running from the law with a fake passport in his pocket. This was a man calmly finishing the last steps of a plan. He was seen around town buying supplies. He apparently mentioned to at least one person that he was headed somewhere specific, though the exact details of what he said have never been confirmed. Some reports suggest he talked about the sea. Others suggest he mentioned the mountains further inland. Nobody who spoke to him in those final days had any idea they were talking to a man wanted for the murder of his own family, because nobody outside that house in Nantes knew yet. And then, nothing. His car was eventually found abandoned nearby. There's no record of him boarding a plane, a boat, or crossing any border under his own name. No body ever turned up along that coastline, despite extensive searches. No confirmed sighting that investigators could ever fully nail down and verify, despite an entire country looking for him within days. Now, think about that for a second. A man who planned a 9-day cover story down to a forged signature does not just vanish by pure accident. Every single piece of evidence points to this being the plan the entire time. Walk out to that coastline, into the mountains, into a new identity, and simply stop being Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès forever. Some investigators believe he may have used the coastal terrain to disappear into the sea itself, staging his own death without leaving a body. Others believe he had a second identity prepared well in advance, complete with documents, a plan, maybe even a destination picked out months before the murders happened. You'd think a 50-year-old guy with zero survival training and no criminal record couldn't actually pull that off. Everyone assumed he'd be caught within weeks. That's usually how these cases go. The person panics, makes a mistake, uses a card, calls someone, and it's over. Most people who try to disappear get caught within the first year, often within the first few months, because staying hidden requires a level of discipline almost nobody can sustain. 15 years later, it still hasn't happened. Since 2011, French authorities have logged over 1,700 separate reported sightings of this man. Monasteries tucked away in the mountains. Religious retreats. Backpacker hostels across Spain and Italy. Quiet villages in South America. A ferry terminal in Morocco. A market in Portugal. Almost every single one of these reports came from somebody absolutely convinced they recognized that exact face, the silver hair, the calm expression, the eyes. 1,700 tips, and not a single one has ever led to an actual arrest. The closest anyone ever got was back in October 2019, 8 years into the manhunt. Police at Glasgow Airport in Scotland pulled a man off a flight coming in from Paris after his fingerprints triggered what looked like a genuine match. For a few hours, French news outlets basically had the headline already written. 15 years of searching, well, 8, at that specific point, finally over. Reporters gathered outside the police station. Xavier's extended family reportedly got calls in the middle of the night. Then the DNA results came back. It wasn't him. Just an incredibly unlucky case of mistaken identity that happened to line up almost perfectly. A man who apparently shared enough physical similarities and, by sheer coincidence, similar fingerprint patterns to trigger the match. But it taught investigators something important. That even with fingerprint databases, international alerts, and an entire continent on the lookout, actually catching this specific man was going to take a lot more than luck and a database match. Over the years, theories about what actually happened to him have basically split into three camps. Some people believe he's dead. That he took his own life somewhere quiet and remote shortly after disappearing, and his body simply hasn't been found yet, or was never meant to be, swallowed by the sea or buried somewhere no one has thought to search. Some people believe he's alive and hiding in plain sight, maybe inside a religious community, using the same calm, respectable persona that fooled everyone in Nantes for 20 years. Hiding not by looking suspicious, but by looking exactly like the trustworthy, devout man he always presented himself as. And a smaller group believes he had help, that somebody, somewhere, whether out of loyalty, sympathy, or manipulation, has been quietly protecting him this whole time, moving him, funding him, keeping him one step ahead. 15 years in, nobody's been able to prove any of the three. And every year that passes without an answer only adds more weight to the case, more true crime forums dissecting every letter he wrote, more amateur investigators mapping every reported sighting on a wall of red string and pins. Okay, so here's the actual reason this case is back in the news, because this isn't old information. This is happening right now, in 2026. Earlier this year, in the Doubs region of eastern France, people inside a small religious community started talking. There was a man there, quiet, aging, going by the name Jean, who kept mostly to himself, participated in daily routines, and generally avoided drawing attention. But something about him didn't sit right with a few people who'd spent enough time around him. Maybe it was the way he spoke. Maybe it was something in his mannerisms, a gesture, a turn of phrase. The resemblance was apparently close enough that investigators didn't just brush it off as another one of those 1700 false alarms. They actually requested a DNA test to settle the question once and for all. Because after 15 years of dead ends, nobody wanted to dismiss a lead that felt this specific. And almost at the exact same time, on a completely different continent, in a stretch of West Texas desert bordering Mexico, the Brewster County Sheriff's Office put out a public appeal for information. Someone claimed they'd seen a man matching Xavier's description back in 2020, walking a black Labrador down a dirt road near the small town of Alpine, Texas. A remote, sparsely populated area where a quiet stranger could genuinely disappear into the landscape without drawing much notice. And here's the detail that genuinely gives me chills every time I read it. Records actually show that Xavier had visited that exact part of Texas multiple times before 2011, and reportedly once told someone it was one of his favorite places on the entire planet. Not a random corner of the world. Somewhere he already knew, already loved, already had some kind of connection to, long before any of this happened. Two completely different continents. 15 years removed from the crime. And somehow, within the same few months of 2026, both of them lit up with his name at the exact same time. Investigators haven't confirmed either lead. But they haven't ruled either one out either, and that alone is more than this case has had in years. If that wasn't strange enough already, a few weeks after both of these stories broke, French television aired what looked like the single biggest development in the entire case. A man went on national TV claiming to be a priest, saying that Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès had personally confessed to him during a private conversation. It was massive. It aired to millions of people. Headlines everywhere, in France and internationally. People who'd followed this case for 15 years finally allowed themselves to believe it might actually be ending. And it was completely fake, a fabrication so convincing it made it to national broadcast before anyone thought to properly check it. France's broadcast regulator actually opened a formal investigation afterward, looking into how a national program let that fabricated confession reach millions of viewers without properly verifying it first. And honestly, that single detail tells you everything about where this case sits, 15 years in. People have stopped just looking for this man. People are willing to believe almost anything at this point, just to finally make the story end. Which, in its own strange way, says as much about us as it does about him. So where does all of this actually leave us? Somewhere out there, right now, there might be a man in his 60s walking a dog down a quiet dirt road in West Texas. Or kneeling in a chapel somewhere in rural France, praying next to people who have absolutely no idea who he really is or what he actually did. Or maybe none of that's even true, and he's been dead for over a decade, buried somewhere nobody has ever thought to look, and every one of these 1,700 sightings has just been the world's imagination filling in a gap that will never actually close. What we do know for an absolute fact is this. A mother and 4 children were murdered in the one place on earth they should have been safest, their own backyard, under their own patio, on a quiet street where nobody locked their doors. And the only person alive who could ever explain why has spent the last 15 years making absolutely sure that question never gets an answer. Whoever he is now, Gene, a stranger in Texas, or nobody at all, he took that answer with him. And until DNA, or luck, or a single mistake finally catches up with him, the rest of us are left with nothing but a patio, a pile of forged letters, and one very old family photograph nobody in Nantes can bring themselves to stop looking at. Some case files eventually get stamped closed. This one's still sitting wide open on somebody's desk, and somewhere out there, so is he.